The world of the millionaire glittered like a diamond under the lights of high society. Every evening seemed to be a celebration, a parade of luxury and excess where champagne flowed endlessly, crystal chandeliers cast golden glows across marble floors, and orchestras played music that seemed to sing of wealth itself. Journalists and photographers lined the entrances of his grand events, their flashes capturing every smile, every step, every gesture of the man who had become a symbol of power and success. He arrived at these gatherings in sleek luxury cars, engines purring like royalty announcing their arrival, with the world watching in awe of his untouchable aura. To outsiders, his life was perfection. The mansions sprawling across acres of land, the brand-new jets, the glittering jewels, and the whispered deals that only the wealthiest could afford to make. But it wasn't just his wealth that drew attention, it was the woman by his side. His mistress walked with the confidence of someone who believed she had conquered the world, her designer gowns hugging her frame, dripping in diamonds that sparkled as brightly as her smug smile. She basked in the spotlight, raising her chin high as though she owned everything the millionaire flaunted. She loved the whispers of envy, the camera flashes directed at her, and the way heads turned as she walked by. Every smirk, every glance carried an air of superiority, as if she had proven herself above everyone else, especially the one person she loved to mock, the wife. To her, this glamorous stage was not just about enjoying riches, it was about wielding power, proving her dominance, and flaunting her stolen throne. Little did she know, the very stage she adored so much was being set for her downfall. The night of the charity gala shimmered with elegance, but beneath the glitter, cruelty lurked. Guests in gowns and tuxedos mingled under the glow of chandeliers, their laughter blending with the soft music of a live orchestra. All eyes turned when the mistress entered, draped in a gown of scarlet silk that clung to her like fire, her arm hooked confidently around the millionaire's. She thrived on attention, every step a performance meant to remind the world of her status. And then, as if fate had staged it, the pregnant wife appeared, quiet, graceful, dressed simply, her hands protectively resting on the gentle curve of her belly. The mistress's eyes lit with malicious delight. She leaned closer to the millionaire and whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, her words dripping with venom. "Oh, look who decided to crawl out from the shadows. Did you come to remind us of your little tragedy?" She smirked, her gaze sweeping over the wife's modest dress, her hair pinned simply, and the exhaustion that lingered in her face. "Some women just don't know when to let go. It's embarrassing, really." The wife's cheeks warmed as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others watching with curiosity and pity. The mistress pressed on, her laughter sharp as glass. "Honestly, I don't know what's more pitiful, clinging to a man who's clearly moved on, or thinking anyone here actually still cares about you." But the wife did not flinch. She stood still, her eyes steady though her expression remained soft, fragile even. She lowered her gaze for a moment, as if wounded, then looked up again with a quiet strength that only a few noticed. She didn't lash out, didn't argue, didn't play into the mistress's cruelty. She simply stood her ground, silent and calm, while the mistress believed she had won. Behind the wife's gentle smile and lowered eyes, a storm of secrets brewed that no one in the glittering ballroom could have guessed. To the world, she was a fragile, abandoned woman, pregnant, heartbroken, and humiliated by the mistress's cruel words. Yet beneath the veil of vulnerability lay a razor-sharp mind trained to read people, dissect lies, and uncover truths. She wasn't just a discarded wife, she was an undercover detective working on one of the most dangerous missions of her career. Her every movement was deliberate. The way she let her shoulders droop, the way her eyes shimmered as though on the brink of tears, and the fragile tremor in her voice. All of it was a carefully crafted mask. Behind that act, her mind was calculating, observing every detail in the room. She noticed the way the millionaire kept his hand possessively on the mistress's waist, the way certain business associates avoided his gaze, and the subtle exchanges of nervous glances that spoke of something darker than vanity and wealth. Hidden beneath her simple gown was not just the symbol of her pregnancy but also the tools of her trade, a discreet wire, a miniature recording device tucked into the folds of her clutch. Every insult hurled her way gave her cover, making her appear harmless, a woman too broken to pose any kind of threat. It was the perfect disguise. Her mission wasn't personal, or at least, it hadn't started that way. She had been assigned to investigate the millionaire for illegal dealings hidden beneath his empire of glamour. But now, standing there, mocked by the mistress and scorned by the man who once vowed to love her, the case had become personal. And as she stood silent, pretending to be weak, she promised herself, their downfall was only just beginning. The mistress stood tall in her glittering gown, a smug smile curving her painted lips as if the entire evening had been arranged just to spotlight her triumph. She loved this life, the champagne in crystal flutes, the endless flash of cameras, the way men's eyes followed her as if she were royalty. But what she loved most was the humiliation she could inflict on the pregnant wife, the woman she believed was no competition at all. Every word that left her mouth dripped with arrogance. She leaned into the millionaire's arm, laughing loudly enough for the wife to hear, whispering little jabs disguised as playful banter. "Some people just don't belong in circles like this," she sneered, her eyes darting deliberately to the wife's modest dress. She flaunted the designer jewelry the millionaire had lavished on her, letting the diamonds catch the light, as though their sparkle proved her superiority. For the mistress, the wife's silence only fed her sense of victory. She mistook calm restraint for weakness, interpreting lowered eyes as defeat. In her mind, she had won, snatching not only the millionaire's love but also his wealth, his name, and his power. She paraded her dominance boldly, relishing the whispers of envious women and the approving nods of men blinded by her beauty. What she didn't know, however, was that her arrogance was leading her straight into a carefully woven trap. The wife she mocked was no helpless victim but a predator cloaked in patience, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Yet the mistress, drunk on her own cruelty and blinded by glittering illusions, couldn't see the danger standing quietly before her. In her arrogance, she believed she was untouchable, never realizing the ground beneath her was already crumbling. Long before the glittering parties and cruel mockery, the wife had chosen a path few would ever imagine for her. Beneath the gentle smile and the growing life she carried within her, she bore the weight of a secret mission that demanded every ounce of her strength. Years before, tragedy had touched her family. Her brother had fallen victim to a powerful crime ring that left her with unanswered questions and a burning desire for justice. It was this fire that led her into the world of undercover work, where she trained, endured, and learned to live a double life. Her mission was dangerous, one that required absolute secrecy. The millionaire, with his spotless public image and reputation for success, was not the man the world believed him to be. Behind his empire of wealth lay hidden ties to illicit dealings, money laundering, trafficking of influence, and dirty partnerships with shadowy figures. The mistress, glamorous and cunning, was not just his arm candy but an active accomplice who helped him manipulate and bribe, ensuring silence from anyone who dared question their empire. For the detective wife, this was personal and professional all at once. She had accepted the assignment knowing it would push her into enemy territory, but no one could have predicted how close she would have to get to the man himself. Posing as the loving, vulnerable wife gave her access to his world, to his secrets, and to the proof that could finally bring him down. The mission wasn't only about justice, it was about survival. She knew her unborn child's future depended on dismantling the web of corruption surrounding the millionaire and his mistress. Every moment she endured their cruelty wasn't weakness, but strategy, as she built the case that would end them both. By day, she wore the mask of a defeated woman, eyes downcast, shoulders heavy with the weight of supposed helplessness. The mistress laughed at her, the millionaire dismissed her, and society pitied her. But behind that carefully crafted facade, she was relentless. Every whispered conversation, every careless boast from her husband or the mistress, became another thread she pulled into her growing web of evidence. A small recorder hidden in her jewelry captured secrets that would one day shatter their empire. At night, when the house grew quiet, she reviewed her notes in secret. Financial statements casually left on a desk, coded emails she'd memorized before they were deleted, even the hushed phone calls made behind closed doors, all became ammunition in her silent war. She knew better than to confront them outright. To do so would cost her mission and perhaps her life. Instead, she allowed herself to be underestimated, to be mocked and overlooked, because that invisibility gave her power. Each step was deliberate. When the mistress bragged about her influence over corrupt officials, the wife noted names and dates. When the millionaire met with shadowy partners, she traced their connections to larger networks. Every insult hurled at her became an opportunity to gather more, to slip deeper into the cracks of their arrogance where their carelessness flourished. Though her heart sometimes ached from the humiliation, and her body strained under the burden of pregnancy, her resolve never wavered. She wasn't simply enduring, she was building a case brick by brick, proof that would one day not only vindicate her but expose them to the world. In her silence, she was weaving their downfall, and they never suspected the fragile wife was holding the knife behind her back. The mistress, who once delighted in seeing the wife shrink under her cruel remarks, began to notice something unsettling. The wife never lashed out, never broke down, never begged for pity. She simply absorbed the humiliation with a calm that felt unnatural. There were moments, brief but undeniable, when the wife's eyes didn't hold weakness at all. Instead, they flickered with something sharp, almost calculating, before softening back into the familiar mask of fragility. At first, the mistress brushed it off. Perhaps it was just her own insecurity, she told herself. After all, she had won the millionaire, hadn't she? She had the wealth, the jewelry, the spotlight, all the things the ex-wife had lost. Still, unease gnawed at her in quiet moments. Why didn't the wife crumble under pressure? Why didn't she retaliate or show even a shred of desperation? Her paranoia grew in whispers. She began watching the wife more closely during parties, trying to catch her slipping. Once, she caught the wife lingering near a conversation she thought was private, and another time she noticed her glancing at a document for a little too long. Both times, the wife played her role so convincingly, eyes glassy with sadness, lips trembling faintly, that the mistress dismissed her doubts with a cruel laugh. She's too broken to fight back, she reassured herself. Yet, the feeling never entirely left. The mistress couldn't shake the sense that beneath the silence, the wife wasn't just enduring humiliation, she was waiting. Waiting for something. The arrogance that had fueled her confidence kept her from digging deeper, but in quiet moments, the mistress couldn't help but wonder, what secret strength was the wife hiding? And why did her silence feel more dangerous than any outburst? The grand hall was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the shimmering glow of chandeliers. The millionaire stood proudly, his mistress by his side, basking in the adoration of high society. But then, the air shifted. All eyes turned when the pregnant wife, dressed simply but with a quiet grace, stepped forward. Her face no longer carried the mask of fragility, it radiated calm authority, a strength no one had seen before. The mistress smirked, ready to unleash another cutting remark. But the wife raised her hand, and her voice cut through the room with unexpected firmness. Enough. The word echoed, silencing the crowd. Everyone froze, stunned by the change in her tone. No longer meek, no longer broken, her eyes burned with determination. She pulled something from her bag. Files, photographs, recordings. You mocked me, she said, her voice steady. But tonight, the truth comes out. I am not the fragile woman you thought I was. I am Detective Sarah Malik, operating undercover to expose corruption, and you, she turned her gaze on the millionaire, and your mistress are at the very center of it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras swung toward her, journalists leaned forward in shock. The mistress's smirk collapsed instantly, replaced by wide-eyed panic. What are you talking about? She's lying, she sputtered, but her voice cracked. The millionaire's polished facade shattered as sweat broke across his brow. He opened his mouth but no words came, only silence. The wife continued, her tone sharp and unflinching. For months I've gathered evidence of your embezzlement, fraud, and ties to organized crime. While you paraded your wealth, I was recording every deal, every lie, every betrayal. And now, the law will deal with you both. The mistress stumbled back, her arrogance crumbling into fear. The crowd erupted into whispers, some pulling out phones to capture the historic moment. The millionaire's empire, so carefully built on deceit, was unraveling before the very people whose admiration he craved. And at the center of it all stood the wife, not broken, not humiliated, but powerful. A detective, a mother, and a woman who had turned betrayal into justice. The room erupted into chaos as uniformed officers stepped forward from the shadows, badges gleaming under the bright lights. The millionaire, once untouchable and adored, was suddenly surrounded. His face drained of color as handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. For the first time, the man who had controlled every room he entered looked small, powerless in the grip of justice. The mistress, her designer dress glittering under the lights, shrieked in disbelief. She tried to cling to him, insisting it was all lies, but the evidence had already been projected for the crowd to see. Bank transfers, secret recordings, photos of illicit meetings. Her beauty, once her weapon, now seemed hollow. The same society that had fawned over her now whispered with disdain. Former admirers turned away, shaking their heads at her arrogance and cruelty. Reporters rushed forward, cameras flashing, recording every humiliating second. The guests, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, whispered venomously, their sympathy shifting entirely to the pregnant wife who had unmasked the scandal. The mistress's once prized status as the millionaire's partner disintegrated before her eyes, replaced by disgrace and ridicule. The millionaire, dragged past the crowd, caught one last glimpse of his ex-wife. She stood tall, her hand gently resting on her belly, her calm composure contrasting starkly with his downfall. That image would haunt him forever. By the end of the night, headlines screamed of the empire's collapse. Investors fled, partners severed ties, and years of greed evaporated overnight. The mistress found herself abandoned, her reputation ruined, while the millionaire faced prison and the ruins of everything he had once prized. And society. It turned its back on them, hailing the wife not as a victim, but as the woman who brought the guilty to their knees. The night ended not in humiliation for her, but in triumph. As the millionaire was led away and the mistress's sobs echoed faintly in the background, the wife, no longer just a betrayed woman, stood steady, the weight of her unborn child reminding her of the future she was building. She had walked into that glittering world as someone mocked and underestimated, yet she walked out as the woman who had pulled the mask off corruption and revealed the truth. Every step she took away from the flashing cameras and gasping crowd carried the dignity of someone who had chosen strength over despair. She had endured betrayal, cruelty, and mockery, but instead of breaking, she had sharpened herself into something unshakable. She wasn't simply surviving anymore, she was leading her own story, protecting not just her baby, but her own honor. The whispers of pity that once followed her had transformed into admiration. People looked at her differently now, not as the poor pregnant wife mocked by a mistress, but as the undercover detective who had dismantled a corrupt empire. Her courage had become a story of resilience, whispered in admiration long after the lights dimmed. As she stepped into the cool night air, the city lights reflected in her eyes like tiny sparks of hope. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew she was more than capable of walking it. She had her child to live for, her integrity intact, and the strength of a warrior who had already faced her darkest battle. With one last glance behind her, she closed that chapter forever, carrying herself forward, not as a victim, but as a symbol of justice, dignity, and unbreakable strength.